Coming up on today's show, we get fancy with Traefik labels and then gush over some of the new Home Assistant features while we save our data from certain failure. I'm Chris.
And I'm Alex, and this is self-hosted. I'm so excited. Autumn is here. The fall is here. I'm wearing jeans today for the first time in 5 months.
Yeah, I'm wearing pants too, and I don't typically podcast with pants.
I love that that's a thing. I don't typically podcast with pants.
It's too warm. You know, a gentleman wants to be comfortable, so that way his analysis is comfortable. You got nothing? You're just thinking back over all the episodes pantless. Hey, I didn't say I'm not wearing shorts, Alex. You know, I'm not saying.
Well, I was thinking that you do all your thinking with your dick, so you got to keep that at the correct temperature. And
well, let's just say I can't think if it's too warm.
But then thought that probably wasn't radio appropriate.
No, of course not. No, of course not. No, of course not. You know what we ought to do is maybe not talk about our pants and instead talk about, self-hosting things.
Maybe.
This episode is brought to you by a cloud guru. Are you looking to get a high-paying career, maybe move into the cloud and make some good change? Well, there's no better place to start than getting a certification. ACG has helped more than 2 million people scale up on the cloud, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. Head over to cloudguru.com and get started.
So let's crack things off with a public service announcement.
All right.
The LinuxServer.io team have made some changes to their reverse proxy. So for many, many years, they've released a Let's Encrypt container. Now they've been contacted by Let's Encrypt to enforce their trademark. So they've had to rename it. They've renamed it SWAG for Secure Web Application Gateway.
Oh, okay. I thought it was going to be security we all get.
It could be. I mean, it's an acronym. It can be whatever you want, right?
I like to think so.
It's a drop-in replacement for the existing Let's Encrypt container, and there is a blog post linked in the show notes. So if you're running the old one, it's going to stop being updated in favor of this new one. Just go ahead and update your compose file or whatever you're doing.
Well, big congratulations to LinuxServer.io for getting large enough that they showed up on the trademark radar of Let's Encrypt. That's a milestone.
I think they're at about 12 billion pulls these days, so they're doing pretty well.
Woo-wee. I know. I'm one of them. I just pulled down my new images for Plex, SyncThing, and a few other very handy backend services that are LinuxServer.io Docker images. So I'll have a link to that, like Alex said, selfhosted.show/28.
We'll talk a little bit more about some new Linux server image that's been released this week. But first, I've been experimenting with Traefik. It's spelled Traefik, so Traefik is kind of how it's spelt, but I think everybody just says it Traefik.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit before on the show.
Now, in the last episode, I mentioned lychee, which, by the way, if you're American, is pronounced lychee, and if you're from the UK, is pronounced lychee. I went on Wikipedia and checked.
Oh, that's not confusing at all. Okay.
Potato. Anyway.
Right.
So I started building out some infrastructure using our new sponsor, Linode. I was using Ansible and Terraform to do this. And one of the things that I like to do is use Ginger templating to create my Docker Compose files. This means I can store all of my container variables in Ansible, run it through the Ginger templating engine, and it spits out a Docker Compose file on the other side. Now, when I was using Nginx as my reverse proxy, it meant I had to also have an Ansible role that copied across and installed the relevant Nginx configuration files. And for anybody that's ever worked with those files, they can be a little bit picky and a little bit cryptic. The single best thing about Traefik is that all of the configuration now for my reverse proxy lives alongside each container as a label.
Yeah, talk about this label thing, because I'm not a Traefik expert, but that's my essential understanding, is that it sort of assigns what you can do based on your label.
Correct. I'm still wrapping my head around it, right? And it's something I've been using for about a month now. I had a lot of help with some of the guys on Discord in particular. I know I seem to mention Discord every week, but
there's a lot going on over there.
That's where the fun is. So I've put together a kind of beginner's guide to Traefik, but not as a blog post for once. What I've actually done is I've just put a compose file in my infrastructure repo.
Oh, okay, up on GitHub.
And a link to that, of course, is in the show notes. And in there, what you can hopefully see is just how simple this thing is to configure. So You define a series of routers and services. And as part of those routers and services, you define the host name and the entry point you want to use. So for me, I use Cloudflare for my DNS. So Traefik will automatically talk to Cloudflare as part of the ACME process to get my TLS certificates from Let's Encrypt. So I tell each container to use that particular certificate resolver, Cloudflare. And then from there, I tell the router which service to use. So for example, for Nginx, if I'm running that as a container behind Traefik, would be on port 80, or Plex would be on 32400, for example. And it's just super simple.
And where are you defining this? Where does that information get stored? What mechanism?
That's the best part. So with Nginx, for example, it would be in a Docker volume that I would mount through a bind mount system to my container, and then those reverse proxy configuration files need to persist on my host.
Right.
With Traefik, it's a label that lives in the Docker Compose file. So right next to where I'm saying I want to run, LinuxServer /Plex, for example, I then have a label section with 5 lines in it that says Traefik enable true, use this host name, so plex.ktz.whatever, use this entry point of web secure, so HTTPS, for example, and then use the cert resolver of Cloudflare. This is the 4th line. And then the 5th line is use port 32400.
And it's just right there. It's simple. It's easy to read YAML that's just in the Docker Compose file. And I think that's the part that really has to be underscored. And it's so tidy because it's right there with all of the other information about that container. It's easy to read, easy to replicate, and associated and attached with that container.
And because it's in that single file, if I commit that single file to Git, I have a history forever until the end of time, exactly what my configuration parameters were for that specific container. Whereas if I'm relying on a bunch of different files that are on my file system in different directories and stuff like that, who's to say that my Ansible role doesn't have a bug in it that doesn't overwrite that particular file when I change the name of the container or whatever it is? There's just a whole bunch of edge case scenarios that this solves for me, and I absolutely love it.
How are you choosing what gets committed to Git? Is it every config file? Are you hand committing certain config files? What's the system there?
Well, I have a blog post about working with Ansible and secrets. The short version of that is I use the Ansible Vault functionality to encrypt a couple of files in my repo. All of the secret source lives in that encrypted file. Ansible then interpolates through its templating engines those variables into the playbooks when it runs. Ansible looks for a specific variable. If it can't find it in a decrypted file, it will go to the encrypted file and look for it. And so for me, I generally tend to go with the approach that anything that's personally identifiable, like an IP address or a serial number or an API key, obviously is secret. Just anything that I would rather somebody else didn't know, I tend to put in the Vault file and then use my Ansible roles to decrypt. Now, the downside of that is it means it has to live in plain text on disk somewhere. But the reality of being a sysadmin is that at some point somewhere, something's got to be in clear text. Somebody has to have the ultimate password somewhere, even if it's in your brain. Encryption is great, but at some point somewhere, somebody needs the key to that vault.
Well, that's pretty cool, Alex. I like that I can just go in here and read this, and that also makes it very easy for me to get started, because being able to actually see this example here, which we'll have linked in the show notes, really makes it click for me. Because the other thing we haven't even talked about is the user front end, web UI to Traefik and all of that stuff, but fully understanding how I label stuff in Docker Compose kind of completes my understanding, and now I really kind of see why people are talking about Traefik. It looks really nice.
There was a big change in how Traefik defined their routers and services and front ends and back ends between V1 and V2. Now, we're talking about V2, the current release. Now, in V1 times, I just wrote them off as cluttering my Docker Compose file. I didn't want that. I didn't want that clutter in my file. But as I've kind of matured my approach to, configuring all these different systems, I now have my personal server at home. I have a cloud instance that I configure that runs all my websites, my blog and stuff like that. and some stuff for my family as well. I then have the self-hosted infrastructure and a couple of other things that I also look after. By the time I'm scaling this to 5, 6, 7 different sites, it's just really nice to have one single source of truth, be that compose file.
Yep. Amen to that. That's how I feel too. Well, you heard Alex mention it. We use it. We love it. Linode. Linode.com/SSH. Get a $100 60-day credit on new accounts. And here's a little pro tip. Linode just posted a guide on using object storage as a backend storage mechanism for Nextcloud, where you can kind of just have unlimited space, but you also take advantage of their crazy fast storage. And it's what we use. It's how we do it here at Jupiter Broadcasting. And so I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes because Linode is simple cloud infrastructure that you can spin up for anything you need. A shared host is something with dedicated GPUs or CPUs. Everything's priced really reasonable. And they have a cloud management UI to take care of all of it. You just get started by going to linode.com/SSH. You mentioned, Alex, that you were deploying some systems with Terraform on Linode. What's that process like?
It's been really, really easy, actually. The documentation up on the Terraform provider's website is very well written, very well documented. And if you would like to see a full example, of course, there's a link in the show notes to the self-hosted infrastructure repo that I'm using. And in there, it's just been really simple, really straightforward to get started.
That's nice. That is really nice because you can plug it in with an orchestration suite you're already using or take advantage of the tools that they have. And what's great about Linode is they're the largest independent open cloud provider in the world with 11 global data centers. Linode's been around for about as long as user mode Linux has been around. Their founder saw the opportunity and built something that was accessible for just about everyone, just about everywhere. So go to linode.com/SSH to get started, and then check out the app marketplace, for example. An easy way to self-host your own applications and get started with their stack scripts. Another nice way to build a quick and easy system, reproducible, easy system. I just recently decided I'm going to set up a dedicated SSH jump host. At first, it sounds kind of crazy, but then I realized at $5 a month, I can really go all in on the security on this box, maybe even kind of as a learning opportunity, and it'll be my jump host system to get around wherever I need to go. That's a great use for the $5 a month system. But our Matrix box that runs the Jupiter Broadcasting Matrix server, that's a little more powerful. We went ahead and did a dedicated CPU for that one because there's hundreds of users using that system. And that's the great thing about Linode. They've been around for a long time. They're the largest independent open cloud provider, and they've got a great pricing structure and a very competitive dashboard. You got to go check them out. Linode.com/SSH, and a big thank you to Linode for sponsoring the self-hosted program.
Last week, we celebrated our birthday, and this week, it's Home Assistant's birthday.
Yeah, only we get the presents. How great is that? We get all the new stuff. This is one of those things like before the show, Alex and I were like, how do we cover this? Because we could probably, I bet you, make 2 episodes out of just the updates in this one release. This was a really big one. So we thought maybe instead we'd just pull out like 2 or 3 of like the heavy hitters and just talk about those and then link you to the resources. For those of you that haven't listened to the show for a while, Alex and I, big Home Assistant users. In fact, I use it more than ever these days. I don't know about you. I think you too, Alex, right?
Huge.
Huge.
Yeah. I love the Home Assistant.
Well, the Home Assistant has the new release, and I think probably the thing you're excited about, the thing I'm looking forward to, is NFC tag support. I think that's going to be a big deal.
Mm-hmm. It's really, really easy as well. So they've updated the companion apps that run on iOS and Android. So you can actually write the NFC tags directly from the app on your phone. And then as soon as you scan it, you can assign automations to it. So as part of this release this week, the automation engine has had a complete overhaul. So now the YAML-based automation stuff is a lot better than it used to be. And so one of the things I've decided to do is stick an NFC tag on the outside of my house so I can tap my phone to the outside of my house and have it open my garage door, for example. Can't tell you the number of times I've been outside my house without my keys thinking, I need to get in. But my keys are on the inside and the only door that's open is the back door, but I want to go in the front door right now. And this should be a solved problem.
And I want to be lazy, dang it. No, I completely agree. So the mixer I have here, the Behringer X32, has a built-in spot for your cell phone. It's weird. I've never seen a mixer that does this, but it actually has a little spot for you to place your cell phone on the mixer. And that's because it has, I think, a mobile app where you can control some of the mixer settings. You know what I did? Put a little NFC tag right in that spot. So when I set my phone down in its holder on the mixer, it turns on my lights, it changes the colors, it just sort of gets things ready to go. So I don't have to come in here and, I don't even have to speak to an Echo or anything. It just put it right down there and it communicates with the Home Assistant we have here at the studio. I love this feature, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a little tag outside. I'd like to find a black colored NFC tag. All the ones I have right now are white stickers.
I found some heavy duty outdoor grade ones.
Oh, really?
They're about $1 each, so they're quite expensive for NFC tags.
It's okay. It's got to survive going down the road and in the rain. So
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I think I want to do, is put something outside and just turn lights on and whatnot.
I came up with quite a fun thing to automate in this house. My wife loves classical music and I love sort of rock music, like Tool and Green Day and stuff like that. And so when we're cooking, we both generally want the opposite person's playlist to never be in existence. And so I've 3D printed a violin and a guitar, and I've put the NFC tags on the back of these 3D printed things. And I just tap the thing that I want and it plays it through Spotify through my Google Home in the kitchen.
That is a clever idea. I like the use of the 3D icon really to drive it home. Makes it a physical thing you're touching.
Yeah. And then the other thing I've done is when it's bin day, we have a little picture of a bin, which I've 3D printed again and put next to the bins in the kitchen. So we tap that and it turns all the lights in the whole house on so we can walk around for 20 minutes, empty all the bins. But then it also turns on the driveway lights, opens the garage door. So you don't have to do anything. The house is just ready for you to go out. Because you know what? When you're emptying the bins, you know what you're going to do. You're going to walk around, empty the bins, then go outside, put it in the big plastic ones outside, put them at the end of your driveway, and then come back in again.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I have a series of outdoor lights and a couple of other things that I need to quickly take down and pack up. And what I have to do now is I'm outside. I have to bring out my phone and I load the Home Assistant UI and then I tap them off before I unplug them all. So that way they're in an off state when I remove them from the network. And I could just put an NFC tag out there and just totally do it that way.
You totally could, yeah. The magic part is with this bin automation, I'm very proud of this one, is when it starts, it takes like a snapshot of the current scene of the house.
Yeah.
So all the lights that are currently on are stored to a temporary state, if you like, a temporary scene. 20 minutes later, when the bin automation finishes, that scene gets recalled and the house just returns to how it was before.
Oh, so the previous state is restored. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That is nice. See, now you're getting fancy with the automations, with the 3D printing and the restoring the previous state. That's next level stuff there.
Guy gets bored, particularly in lockdown.
Yeah, and we love ourselves some Home Assistant. So the other thing that is noteworthy for Mac users, and perhaps an indication of the knock-on effects of the upcoming Apple ecosystem with ARM processors in the Macs too, but Home Assistant companion app for the Mac is now a reality. It's early, it's rough, but the thing that's neat here, and I'd like to put a call out to the audience to see if we can pull this off for Linux, is one of the many things this companion app can do on the Mac OS is observe the state of the Mac, because the Mac has several conditions: in use, idle, screensaver, sleeping, and it could turn those into sensors into Home Assistant, among other things. There's other things that it's monitoring as well as sensor inputs to Home Assistant to help automate things around when you're using your computer. I love this idea, and I'd like to apply it to other desktops.
It can detect which mic, which webcam is in use. When you're on a particular Zoom call or something, you could have a light outside of your office that turns red that says, I am on the phone, be quiet, stop making noise.
Or, like me, I'm that guy, but I have lights and stuff in the background for my Zoom calls. I try to make it look presentable. You could have that stuff turn on when the mic activates.
Is there a word for that? I feel like it's going to be added to the dictionary soon. It's like peacocking, but on Zoom. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like Zoom fronting.
Backgrounding.
Yeah, that'd be better. Zoom backgrounding. Yeah. Of course, most people these days just go with the virtual backgrounds. So that's neat. It's an official release from the project. But just as an aside, and maybe ultimately more important for new users, because I played around with this and it's pretty powerful. There is a new feature that allows you to add Lovelace cards, which is the dashboard UI of Home Assistant, by entity. And what that means is you can select a sensor or a camera feed or power switch, and Home Assistant will suss out what the functionality of that is supposed to be and automatically generate you a dashboard card for it. And so you don't have to appreciate or understand how these are constructed anymore. You just look at your entities. Like myself, I've never built dashboard entries for my seismic sensors. I just never got around to it. I knew the data was getting logged. I was happy with that. However, I thought, well, why not? I never really quite knew how to do that. So I went in by entity, selected my seismic sensors, and Home Assistant just generated me a brilliant dashboard widget for it, a Lovelace card. And it's great. And you can do the same thing with new integrations just to get an idea of what Home Assistant thinks you might be able to do with them. I did that with the Ring camera, which has limited functionality if you don't pay for the service, but it's still useful integrating into Home Assistant. And I didn't really know what you could do there, so I just added that entity and let it generate one for me.
Yeah, I think we should talk more about that Ring stuff in the future. There's a whole world of cloud-connected stuff that's actually pretty cool that we don't touch on that often.
Yeah, I agree. Some of that cloud stuff is expensive, like the Ring products themselves. Not a cheap product long-term, but they have a pretty low upfront cost. And initial indications are they integrate pretty well with Home Assistant. If you guys are out there experimenting with that, let us know, because I do feel like it's a blind spot of ours a little bit.
Big congratulations to the Home Assistant for their 7th birthday release. Huge amount of work must be going into this project. I'm so glad that it exists, because it just makes so many things that you would have had to buy proprietary stuff for possible. I'm so thankful. So thank you, Home Assistant.
Now let's talk about Scrutiny. This is a project that could help bring visibility to something that I often forget to check in on.
You think you're so smart.
Oh, yeah. Well, at least my hard drives do. But of course, what does it matter if nobody's ever checking their smart status?
Correct. Yes. So one of our community members, Analog J, has released a new tool called Scrutiny. And this is designed to monitor your hard drive smart metrics. But here's the really cool part. It uses the real-world failure rates published by Backblaze to tell you whether that is in line with what other people who have those hard drives are seeing.
Yes. And it puts it all together in a very easy-to-read dashboard with a brilliant layout. So it's super easy to consume the information. This is a great idea, Alex.
Yeah, it is. And I nearly lost my freaking mind when I first saw this on Reddit. Analog J was asking for 25 sponsors before he made this public and open source, and he got there last week. And as soon as he went open source, one of the Linux server devs reached out to me and said, hey, do you think we could release this as a container? So I put those two people together and I put the PB and the J in the sandwich, and there's now a Linux server container for Scrutiny.
Oh, so I could put this easy peasy on the Studio NAS. I need to as well, because those drives are getting a few years old. Like, they're getting in that zone. So being able to compare that to the mean from Backblaze, well, it's either going to make me accelerate my plan to replace them or give me some comfort. I'm not sure.
Now, it's still early days with the project. You know, there's still a few buttons and knobs and widgets that don't work yet, and he's adding to it all the time. But if you find it useful, go open some issues, give him some feedback, come find him in the Discord. Tell him what you want to see, because I think something like this is sorely needed for those of us that aren't running Unraid or FreeNAS or something like that. And it just looks like a really great project. The UI is beautiful, and the information it provides is really, really useful. So
yeah, and it's using SmartD on the back end, so it's getting tried and true information from SmartD. Also, we're going to mention again this week Cloudfree.shop. Now, Cloudfree.shop has a wide range of smart home devices. This is a community members project that are pre-flashed with Tasmota. And that means no cloud connection is ever required. It means you can just plug it in and guarantee that as long as that device operates and runs, it is under your control. There is no service that will turn it off. And check this out. This is pretty great. If you use the code self-hosted at checkout, you support the show. So that's pretty nice. And do they get anything special when they use that?
yeah, since last time, we've negotiated that the audience will get $1 off per plug.
Oh, per plug. So buy a whole bunch. Yeah, right? That's great. Cloudfree.shop. It's something that Alex and I had talked about on air. It's like, why doesn't somebody just sell these devices preloaded with Tasmota? Yeah, this is just really cool. Cloudfree.shop. Alex and I have talked about it before and wondered, why isn't somebody doing this? Get these things pre-flashed with Tasmota and sell it. And it's a pretty good price too.
All right, time for some feedback, I think. So Alex C writes in the One Is None episode, when you were converting from ext4 to Btrfs, Chris, I was wondering why you don't use MOSH or something like tmux or Screen. The reason I like MOSH is that it covers you if your network connection drops or if you're roaming between Wi-Fi and mobile internet.
And I think Alex maybe might have MOSH and tmux slightly confused if when you read the full email, but it's a good question because a lot of mistakes were made that night, Alex. A lot of mistakes. So I generally always do use MOSH. I don't think of it typically when I'm on the LAN as the same machine that I'm connecting to, although I really should always just be in practice. But I think my bigger mistake, honestly, was not using tmux. See, tmux would keep that session persistent even if I completely disconnected, right? Where MOSH is going to help smooth out disconnects and interruptions and changing of IP addresses. So it would have helped, but tmux would have been the better solution. But that night, I just wasn't thinking. I bet you my laptop wasn't even plugged in. I mean, I was just in a bad state. It was too late. I knew I shouldn't be doing it, like in the back of my mind, but I pushed forward because I had ran out of time and I needed to get this done before we left for a trip, if I recall, and made the mistake of not taking the proper process, not taking the proper steps to make sure an SSH remote connection is absolutely as rock solid as possible when doing a major file system operation. And that's just the fundamental mistake. I know better. I knew better. Thankfully, in the end, I was able to recover everything. I remember, Alex, how that compounded with an issue where my Google Drive payment had expired because my credit card got shut down due to fraud at the same time. Oh, my God, that was a nightmare.
It was like the perfect storm of data loss.
It was a nightmare. So, I have learned from that. I constantly check in on that stuff now. Because I'm paranoid that that's going to get shut down. And frickin' fraud happened again. Just about a month ago, my credit card was shut down again. Somewhere on one of my trips, I guess somebody had copied it and then waited quite a while in Texas to try to use it, but they did eventually try to use it. So the bank cut that off and I had to go through the process all over again. But this time I made sure that Google Drive was paid for.
Fool me once, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, MOSH is pretty cool. I've used it a few times, mostly when I was a consultant traveling around on the trains and stuff in England a lot.
Perfect for that.
Relying on, 3G, 4G connections all the time. And the reason MOSH feels so nice to use is because all the keystrokes are local, and then it sort of sends them quietly in the background. So obviously you might, if you go through a dead patch, you might have to wait for the screen to update on the result of your command. But in terms of what you're typing, which is kind of the biggest indicator of latency, it just feels really responsive and just really nice.
Well, it is. It's local echo. So it's locally echoing back to you and then buffering it, which is so clever. That is really pretty nice. Since then, I am so good about it. I don't know if it'll last forever, but it sort of renewed my best practices when it comes to this stuff. I was like, oh, that was my moment. That was my lesson. I managed to pull out of it, but I never want that to happen again.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the downside of something like MOSH is that you've got to type MOSH instead of SSH. And at this point, SSH is muscle memory for me.
Yeah.
I guess I could use a bash alias, but it also requires MOSH to be installed on the remote system, which isn't always the case.
Not too hard to do. It's not a whole bunch of stuff, but it is, you have to have it on both ends. That is very true. I think tmux, if you're not familiar with tmux, it's worth looking into. It's a real neat trick to connect into a server, get a session running, get a whole bunch of stuff going, and then you can just disconnect and it keeps running. It's
a great way to pair program as well, because if you open two tmux sessions on two different systems, they will both update in real time with the same thing.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. We actually even just use it. Just recently, Wes and I were messing around with recording audio from the command line, and we just use it for working on that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. So I know better. Anyways, it won't happen again, I promise. But if it does, I will admit it to you guys. I will come clean on the show.
Yeah, sure. Now, in future episodes, we're going to take a look at some container dashboards and maybe a look at Caddy, which is another alternative to Traefik as a reverse proxy. But in the meantime, I think it's time we thanked our site reliability engineers, don't you, Chris?
Yep. Last episode, we launched the self-hosted Site Reliability Engineers membership, the folks that help keep this show sustainable, reliable, and fully operational. I think we still have some early bird SSH codes, too. If you use the promo code SSH, it takes a little bit of money off, so the membership is even, I think, $1 cheaper. And you can go to selfhosted.show/SRE to get there and just put the promo code SSH in there. We've got more show for our members. We're doing a bonus post show with every single episode, and we're also doing a limited ad feed for that episode. So it gives you a whole new RSS feed for the show, a fully produced limited ad with additional bonus content. And that's a thank you to the site reliability engineers who are keeping this show going. So big thank you to everybody out there. And Alex and I are already cooking up new ideas for future membership content as well. Selfhosted.show/SRE. Thanks, everybody. It's pretty cool, Alex. You know, it's pretty nice seeing that come in because going independent again is scary, but also awesome at the same time. And it's a great representation of audience support, too. But we totally understand not everybody can afford a membership. That's totally cool. Just listening to the show, and if maybe a sponsor seems like the right fit or there's somebody you think you could share the show with, we really appreciate that support, too.
Word of mouth is the best marketing there is.
It's like the only marketing that works for podcasts. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Quick follow-up from last episode where, Chris, you talked about having to run home to pull in your awning because it got too windy. We had a few recommendations from the audience.
Yeah, a couple of people, and I think you and I thought of this right after we wrapped up, recommended the Shelly. That crossed our mind as well. But Brian Davenport wrote in with a neat idea of essentially a little wind speed gauge that would transmit on the 433 megahertz band, and it would send the speed to a decoder device. That decoder device would monitor the speed, and when it reached a certain percentage or whatever, a certain speed number, it would then trigger a hall sensor switch and close that, which would then retract it. The other idea that I had was just check the weather in the morning.
Oh, come on.
I know, no, it's not good enough. Well, and you know what's funny, Alex, is today as we're recording, a construction truck backed up into the pole that has our power transformer and knocked it over, and now we have no power, which is fine because we've got plenty of battery and solar. The thing is nobody's home. We may have left the air conditioning set to automatically kick in, and that'll drain the batteries pretty quick. And so I got thinking, it's like, you know what I need the system to know when it's in a limited power state. And I go back to, I know we have a couple of audience members out there who are pulling this state information from their Victron devices and feeding it into HomeAssistant. And I remember somebody hooked up a Raspberry Pi to pull in the information and then essentially MQTT it to HomeAssistant, but I don't recall the details. But all this started flooding back to me when I think about, is there anything I could do to tell the system, hey, now you're in battery mode, why don't you turn some crap off? Seems so obvious.
Seems like you need to have your air conditioning on a remote control as a starting point.
Yeah, I do. And it's tricky because I don't think it's like a household air conditioner, right? It's a furnace, a fan, and AC. And I imagine it's all DC wiring. So I'm not sure what my options are there either. You know, it's just one of those things I think the step one is take the panel off the wall and see what the wires are.
You know, when we launched this show, the world was still normal. And I was planning to come out and see you in April, and we were going to do a whole bunch of these projects.
Yeah.
Oh, I just want to come out and do half of this stuff for you.
I know. It would be great because we could record it, you know. Yeah. I could learn a bunch from you. You could see how I do some of my crazy setups and the things I'm trying to solve for. It would be a lot of fun.
We could try and not get pulled over in the mountains.
We definitely could do that. That would be a lot of fun. In the meantime, thank you to everyone who sent in some suggestions. If you have Leet Victron knowledge, I would like to pick your brain. So maybe that's my next ask, because we just have the best community ever. Selfhosted.show/contact, or if you'd like to jump on the Discord, selfhosted.show/Discord.
Victron always sounds like it should be like a transformer or something.
It is pretty cool equipment. And the neat thing is, I kind of made a bet on this and wasn't sure because I'd never used any of their equipment before, but I got to say very, very, very satisfied with the purchase. It's an inverter, charge controller, and converter, and is so smooth. I can switch between multiple different power sources and nothing blips. All of my gear stays on. It's great. It's really clean and smooth. It produces clean power. Just very happy. Well, now that we're at the end of the show, I'll mention my website, chrislast.com, Alex's website,
blog.ktz.me.
Well, you can find our sponsor on social media too. A Cloud Guru is at twitter.com, youtube.com, and facebook.com. They're all just / a Cloud Guru. Couldn't be easier. And the podcast here is also on Twitter, self-hosted show.
I'm at Ironic Badger, and that was self-hosted.show/28.